Nautilus is a journey where we're out for more direct impact, right? The innovation that we're building is going to enable better drugs and better therapies to be in the hands of humans, and that enhances the life of millions and millions of people. Impact is what motivates me, and what we're doing is really hard, and I don't feel like anyone else is out there that's going to go get done what we're going to get done.
You're listening to What Fuels You, where we deep dive with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders to learn more about their stories and uncover nuggets of wisdom we can all use. I'm your host, Shauna Swerland, CEO of Fuel Talent, an award-winning recruiting firm based in Seattle. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Sujal Patel. Sujal is founder and CEO of Nautilus Biotechnology, a life sciences company creating a large-scale, single-molecule platform for quantifying and unlocking the complexity of the human proteome, with the goal of enabling fundamental advancements across human health and medicine. With nearly 20 years executive leadership experience driving innovation for high-growth companies, Sujal is a successful entrepreneur, investor, and philanthropist who founded and served as CEO of Isilon Systems, an enterprise data storage company. After completing one of the most successful IPOs of 2006, Isilon was acquired by EMC in 2010 for $2.6 billion. Sujal earned a degree in computer science from the University of Maryland, College Park. He lives with his family in Seattle, Washington. Welcome, Sujal. Good to see you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Shauna, and really appreciate the invite to the podcast.
Yeah, no, this is a big deal. I feel like when I can get somebody like you, I'm like, I've arrived. This is a big deal for me. So thank you. I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire. I did a little research. I know that you love to spend time with your family, right? And yes. So I'm curious, what's your favorite family trip or favorite park in the US?
Okay, well, let me go answer both of those. I'm already breaking the rules. A few minutes.
I know, that's okay.
And I'll pick some recent ones. I think favorite park has to be national park because my family and I are huge national park fans. And if you asked me to pick a favorite, I would have to pick Mount Rainier. Mount Rainier is right in our backyard. It's an incredibly gorgeous part of our state and such a prominent peak, and one that has recreational activities that go on endlessly. If you said, hey, you have to pick outside of Washington State, I'd have to go with Crater Lake, which is another one of my favorites. Such a beautiful part of our country, beautiful lake, and we've had amazing times visiting both of those. You asked about a recent trip as well. I think one of the things that stood out for me just recently, my family and I went to Utah, and we had a bunch of outdoors experiences as you do in Utah. But one of the things that we did that was quite unique is called Via Ferrata. It's the Iron Path or Iron Road, specifically, if you translate it from Italian. And it essentially is like rock climbing, except that they have placed metal rebar into the rock and strategically placed ladders to make it easier. But it's certainly still a mountaineering experience where you're responsible for clipping in yourself and for your safety. And one, I'm a big kid at heart, so it was just incredibly fun, but it was really rewarding to see my kids, which vary in age from like 11 to 16, just go and give it their all and have such an amazing time and really conquer all their fears of heights all in one morning.
Well, this is the best benefit of the podcast is I'm getting little nuggets for me too. So this is great. We're not a huge park family, not because we're not into it, but it's just not on our radar. Now I'm going way off script too, we're not doing rapid fire apparently, but did you and your wife come together on this passion, or is this like a prerequisite when you were finding your woman?
I think
she better be into parks.
I think it's a prerequisite. We both are outdoorsy. We love national parks. We love camping, we like hiking, mountain biking, skiing and snowboarding, anything that's outside. And so our kids have grown up with those activities since they were tiny.
That's great. I love that. And so curious, that's like the app question. Now here's the Debbie Downer question. What's your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve. My biggest pet peeve, I would say, is a work pet peeve, right? As I'm sure we're going to get into. Like for me, Work is a major part of my life. Most of my waking hours are spent at work. Most of my brain cells are focused on work. And at work here at Isilon, my previous company, we maintain a very high performance work culture. We look for that in interviews. We cultivate that. And my biggest pet peeve is when people don't show up for various reasons, but they don't bring their all, they don't bring their best self. And it's a very simple thing that we ask of people, but if they don't, and there isn't a good reason why, it's one of the things that really frustrates me.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, especially because you've scaled big companies and you're like, this is my baby. And I had a control over the culture. And as it grows, it's like further and further away, and it's easier to hide in a bigger company. So I completely agree. And especially after COVID, all this like quiet quitting is real. The people just kind of like phoning it in. I agree. Well, on that note, what would your three most important qualities be that you look for, one in a leader, like maybe a CEO, that you think matter, and also the top three in an employee that you would hire?
I'm going to give it to you I'll give it to you in different buckets that you described. I'm already breaking the rules here, Shauna.
That's okay. I'm guessing you got to where you are by not playing coloring inside the lines, right?
For both of your questions, for both the leader and an employee, my number one trait is perseverance, right? In the journey that I'm at here at Nautilus Biotechnology and the journey at Isilon, nothing about those journeys is easy. The journey is not a linear path to success. In fact, it's nothing like a linear path. And often you're faced with naysayers who say, hey, that can't be done. Hey, you're not going to get over that obstacle. And the only way to get to your goal is to just put that aside, put one step in front of the other, go and get to the next step, and just continue marching and persevering. And so for both leaders and individual contributors, that is an incredibly important trait, and one that I definitely look for. I think if I look at both again, I think another big trait that makes people successful is really empathy and really having a high EQ, right? For leaders and frankly, for individual contributors, figuring out if I'm working with someone, what makes that person tick? What's going on in their life or in their work that might be affecting how this interaction's occurring, or what's going on? How am I going to motivate someone to go and get that above and beyond next great thing done? That is an incredibly important skill to develop, not just for leaders, but also for individual contributors, because every interaction is an interaction where you're looking for something from somebody, they're looking for something from you. And I've spent my entire career leading engineers and scientists over the course of the last 7-8 years. That is a skill that naturally doesn't come to either of those groups of people. And I implicate myself there as well, right? I'm a software engineer and those skills didn't come naturally, but I think it is super, super important. And then I think the third trait is just, it's one that we've already touched on, but I think work ethic is another one of those traits, right? I'm a startup guy. I have always been in startups, except for like the 2 years that some 55,000 person company bought my startup. That was very different, but I am in startups because I want to make an impact. I want to do something that makes the world better, that helps people. And if you're going to be working in that type of environment, you have to be working hard. You have to be thinking, hey, this is for a greater mission. My work that I'm doing has a direct impact. It's very different than a large organization. And so sometimes I think people who are jumping into their first startup, sometimes they just get it and it clicks. I've got one example that I think is just like something I just dealt with in the last couple of months, and then many times people jump into this type of environment and they don't quite get it, and they don't know how to go and push beyond what they thought their limits were and go and unlock that next level. And I think those are the three traits. I think they apply equally to individual contributors, leaders as well.
Okay, so what can someone do to learn empathy? You said it didn't come naturally.
Yeah.
What did you do to hone in on that skill? And I do want to hear this example that you just mentioned.
Yeah. So how do you hone that skill? I think engineers and scientists, at least the ones that I work with, are in general very smart people. They're analytical, they're smart, they can internalize large amounts of information, they can process information quickly. And I think if you're going to develop those skills, the empathy skills, the EQ skills, those are good for leadership. They're good for working with colleagues. They're good for talking to your wife. They're good for motivating your children to think about something one way or versus the other. And so it really first comes down to a desire to want to listen, to want to ask questions that go and elicit a response that gives you more information about a conversation that then helps you figure out, okay, what am I learning about how this person thinks? What am I learning about what motivates this person? What can I say that recognizes what someone is dealing with and then helps to build a closer relationship? Yes, there are training classes, there's lots of resources available, but actually living and doing and intentionally wanting to learn those skills, I think is the biggest piece of that. And I think it has to be done early in your leadership career if you're going to be able to grow rapidly. That's about the example. I recently hired a executive who has spent just about 2 decades at one very large company. And whenever you hire someone like that, you've got to really probe, like, is this a person who is going to understand what is it like to jump into a startup environment where I think his last team at the company he left was larger than the whole company here. And his team, it was count on my fingers how many employees work for him. And so you have to spend a lot of time thinking, what happens if this person goes into an unstructured environment? What happens if there's white space and they need to fill it? What happens if the direction you give them isn't as concrete as it would have been in a larger company? What if you ask them to work twice as hard or do jobs and parts of a job that they haven't done in many years? Can they adapt? And so a lot of
what the keyword is also do, because oftentimes out of huge companies, they're used to delegating, and there might be great delegators, but in a smaller company, it's like player coach role usually.
That's right. And I spend a huge amount of time in these interview cycles, particularly in environments like this, just observing someone in a wide variety of environments. And so I will do an interview in the office. I will take them to dinner. Sometimes I'll take them on a walk. I will probe what their work experience is. I will probe what they do at their house. If you're an engineer and you come to me, it doesn't matter if you have a huge fancy title and you're looking at a CEO job. I'm going to ask you as an engineer, what's your geek project at home? What did you do? Why did you do it? What did you implement that in? Anything that tells me how you're connected to actual work and have the ability to bring yourself back to what's necessary in a startup. And thankfully in this situation, I'm about a month in, and I think the early returns are really great, that this person's adapted super well and is doing a great job. And so for me, that's a super critical skill. And I'm super glad that in this case it's worked out. I've certainly had other cases in the past where it hasn't worked out as well. And all those experiences inform me as I've gone forward and trying to vet.
Well, it's taught you how to put them in different environments and what questions to probe and what to look out for. It makes sense. What do you use any personality assessments in any of these situations, or do you not believe in that?
I've sat on a number of corporate boards, and when we've hired CEOs, we have used DISC assessments and other types of assessments. I find that they're maybe moderately useful, but for me, I am much more an intuitive leader. And for me, I want to go and just get to know the person. I want to be the one that's probing and digging deeper and deeper. And so I don't use any of those types of things.
Yeah. Sometimes you can use them just as a talking point, like, hey, it said in your assessment that you don't do great with feedback. Does that sound accurate? Like, you can use that just as talking points, but interesting. Lately it's been coming up a lot in recruiting where companies are using them, and literally, like, if they don't get this result, I'm not hiring them, not even considering them. And I'm like, that's interesting. I've been recruiting for 30 years. I'm like, that's an interesting approach.
I don't know if that's a good approach. I think that maybe those types of assessments have a place where the interviewer or the interviewing committee doesn't necessarily have the skills that you feel they should to vet a person. And so maybe an assessment gives you some value. For me, I have a very specific interview process with people who are going to report directly to me, and it gets in very deep in a number of areas. It doesn't cover all the areas. It's like high level. And then I pick 10, 12 areas in a second interview, which is usually 2 hours, that I dig deep into. And then from those conversations, there'll be follow-ups as well.
Oh, I'm dying for a follow-up conversation on this, or like, I want to learn more after, that's incredible. Okay. If you could be famous for anything, what would it be? Like outside of your current success? Like an athlete, a rock star, a writer.
Boy, what would I want to be famous for?
And you have to be famous. You can't say I don't want to be famous.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then I guess I'll have to make it absurd. I guess that I would want to be famous for climbing the most mountain peaks without oxygen. I think that record is currently held by
wow,
some amazing mountaineers. I'd have to be famous for topping those records. Be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Is there a habit that you're trying to break? And is there a habit you're trying to create?
Habit I'm trying to break and a habit that I'm trying to create. Let's go for create. I continue to try to make a habit of getting regular exercise. This year I turned 50, and there's a constant battle in my brain. The left side of my brain says, hey, you need to get exercise. And the right side of my brain says, okay, right after this cookie, right after this work, right after this next meeting. And so there's this constant battle. I'm still working on that habit. What habit am I trying to break? I'm trying to break the habit of pushing my bedtime later and later. I have always been someone who gets to bed late, and I always pay for it in the morning. And I would love to be in bed by midnight every night.
Are you watching TV? Are you reading? What are you doing at night? You just can't sleep.
I'm either working or I'm goofing off in any number of ways.
Yeah. Doom scrolling. Yeah. No,
doom scrolling Instagram is definitely on the list sometimes at 11 o'clock.
That's one of my try to break. And I do mostly work out every day. I haven't worked out in like a week, and I actually am loving it. But I do it first thing in the morning, which is the only way, because otherwise I will find reasons. I'm like, there's always something that comes up. So that's my little hack. Okay, final question in our rapid fire, then we're going to get into your life. What was your very first concert that you attended?
My very first concert I attended, I think it was U2, and it was a long.
Oh, that's a good one. Are you into music?
My musical tastes vary quite a bit. They also vary as I've gotten older. And so I like music. Yes, it used to be the usual stuff that you'd listen to from the pop spectrum in the 90s. Recently, I've started to get much more into country, and
country's huge right now.
Variant. I've always been huge in terms of various types of music as well, but it spans the gamut. My daughter's trying to get me into Taylor Swift now. And
I was about to say, I'm ready for Taylor Swift to come up if you've got a daughter. You would be the hero dad, and I'm sure you already are, but that would be the epic move. So tell me, so you grew up in New Jersey. I'm guessing this is like God's country out here. I spent a lot of time on the East Coast, but my friends who come out to visit are like, wow, like mountains, water. What was your childhood like? And were you born there? Are you first generation?
Yeah, so I am born and raised in New Jersey, and I grew up in a standard, boring suburban home in middle-class America, right in the middle of New Jersey. Went to public schools. My parents worked their butts off like immigrants do to make a life for myself and my brother. And Central Jersey, it's a land where there's like strip mall after strip mall. Your school's close by. School bus picks you up. Very much the suburban life.
Yeah, and we're the same-ish. I'm going to be 53 or 50. So yeah, kid of the 70s. It was pretty idyllic, even if it's like strip mall after strip mall. It was like you play all day. And I liked no technology. I'm guessing you were tinkering the minute you could. How old were you when you first discovered technology? Or like that you wanted, were you one of those like take apart the computer people?
Oh, for sure. I was a take apart the computer person. I don't remember the exact age. My brother is 7 years older than me. He was actually born in India. So my parents came to America in between children. So there's a sizable gap between us. And so when he first was getting into computing in high school, my parents ended up buying a Apple II Plus compatible PC, right? We're Indians. We don't want to spend money on the real thing. So we bought a compatible PC, and I probably got more use out of it than he did, just going in, learning everything I could about it. And that computer is what sparked my fascination that led me to computer science.
I love that. And so were there people around you outside of your parents that were impacting your worldview or like who you wanted to be when you grew up? Or was it like your parents were
My
in the
dad
tone?
impacted that view. He always was encouraging to do things that were engineering oriented. He himself was an engineer his whole life. And he always was the one pushing to go figure out how to do something entrepreneurial, figure out how to do something where you could make a bigger impact. Of course, he's Indian, so and make a lot of money while you do it. And so that's where most of that inspiration came from, all the way through my college years as well.
And is he alive? Is your dad alive still?
He's not. He passed away a number of years ago.
And was he able to see you reach your success?
Yes, he was. He was able to see all the way through my first company sale and then my time in between companies. He saw the birth of all of our children. And so
Oh, that's wonderful.
got to see the fruits of all that labor.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like you've been working your ass off. And sometimes there is that, like, I want to be able to enjoy it and also be able to take care of my parents if I've hit a certain level of success. That's great. And so in high school, were you into other things or was it like heads down, computers? And were you playing sports? Were you into art, any other things, or was it more about computers?
I did absolutely nothing except be on my computer all day and night. That's pretty much it. Every minute.
Well, it served you.
It served me well, yes. But pretty much every minute of the day I was on a computer.
Yeah. And when you think back on high school, there's those kids that you're like, oh, this kid's definitely going to kick ass and be successful. Were your friends, are you still in touch with them? Are they surprised by your success? Or is it like, oh yeah, Sujal was always that guy?
I think that I'm not in touch with a lot of people from back then, but I think that the ones who observed me in those latter high school years, my college years, would say, yeah, I saw a drive, or maybe you call it an obsession, but something that was a spark that would probably make someone successful.
Yeah. And are there things that are informing your parenting style that you carried on from your parents, and whether they're traditional Indian values or things that you do, like this is my dad used to take me here and we'd do this together, my mom, or cooking or any of it that this is important to me?
Yeah, I think one piece of it that has carried through is a trait that I find common across all Asian and Indian parents, which is we are all very focused on making sure that kids are focused on education first, making sure that they are looking at college and figuring out what they're going to do, what will they study, how will that how will that be a step on the road to a career that's going to be fulfilling and be successful. And so all of our kids have had that drilled into their heads from a very early age. I think that has been definitely a piece that I've carried over from my parents' generation. But I also think that one of the things, we grew up middle class immigrant family type of lifestyle, right? I didn't start skiing and snowboarding until I was an adult. I don't think I had any what I'd call a real hike until I was an adult. Never went camping. Like, we also infused our family life with a ton of these types of outdoor activities to let the kids experience what I think life should be about, and make it so that work is about fulfillment and giving back to the world and giving you the resources to be able to do all those fun things as well.
So once you've had financial success as a parent, this is me asking parent to parent, how do you ensure that you can instill grit in your kids and keep them aligned with your values, your wife's values, and not get already? These kids have a little bit of entitlement. How do you ensure that there's not that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's hard, and you have to be really intentional about it, right? Let's first go to how do you set expectations for your kids, right? Like, we've taught our kids from when they're tiny that we expect them to work hard in school. We expect them to get excellent grades. We expect them to go to college and get great jobs. You cannot count on us handing you a whole bunch of money and saying, well, it'll be fine, don't worry. No, go out into the world and go do something that's meaningful and contributes to society. Like, I'm going to measure myself based on those three kids launching, going off into the world and doing great things that help our community. Like we've been telling them that since day one.
Instilled in them. Yeah.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, we try to instill in them the work ethic in academics, work ethic to help out at home. We're fortunate enough to have vacation homes in addition to our primary one. Last time we replaced a washer and dryer in our second home, my wife is like, hey, we need the same one that we have in Seattle because my kids already know how to operate that one. And so they can do their laundry here too. Like those are the sorts of lessons that help kids stay grounded. And then even like vacationing, like we take an intentional approach. I'm 50 now. My wife's only 48, but she'll be 50 here soon. Like we can't not take the vacations we want to, and we love traveling. And so we take, and unapologetically, we take lavish vacations. The kids come along and they get to experience that. But then we also stick them in a 140 square foot Sprinter van and drag them through national parks. And we put 62 nights into our Sprinter van with 5 of us sleep in the back of
that is the coolest
tiny space. Like you have to experience both sides of the spectrum. You have to make sure that they don't get accustomed to some kind of lifestyle that they latch onto, and you have to make sure they've got the work ethic.
I think that is, you nailed it right there. Like the Sprinter van move is everything, because I have seen it with friends' kids where they become like entitled, like, ugh, we're here. And I'm like, please don't say that out loud. Like we're only at this level hotel or whatever. And it's hard because you might want to take that vacation. I also know that you set up a family foundation. What are your philanthropic passions and where are you donating your money, and what role do your kids play in that decision?
Yeah, so the majority of our giving is biomedical research. It's children's causes, which largely is education. And there's a little bit of like climate and other kind of impact causes that are in there. That's like 98% of our giving. And so those are the major focuses for us. As the kids get older, we introduce them to some of the charities and the organizations that we support. Our kids observe both Mira and I on various nonprofit boards and trying to help out our community where we can. And as they get older, we continue to involve them in how we vet these types of organizations. We bring them to events that these organizations have. And ultimately, I would expect them to play up the decision-making of where we direct those funds.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And so you grew up in Jersey. How did you pick University of Maryland? I'm in the throes of it. I've got one kid in college and my daughter is applying to schools right now. And it's just such a crapshoot. And it's so different than when we went to school. The pressures are crazy.
Yeah, it definitely is different. I will tell you, my criteria were I need a really good computer science program, and I wanted to stretch my legs and find my own wings. So in order to do that, I had to I can't be like at Rutgers University, which is
right in the backyard,
Jersey, in the backyard. I wanted to go somewhere which was a little bit further. When I visited Maryland, I really thought the campus was beautiful. They've got this huge mall, it's outdoor area. The campus has these brick buildings which are beautiful. The school's got a ton of spirit, and it's just right outside of our capital. I thought it was a great fit, and I was super happy with my 4 years there.
That's great. So that was the right choice for you, because I am fascinated by people's life choices. And especially now, I'm trying to remind my daughter, because the pressure feels so huge, that even on the podcast, I've asked people like about choices that they've made. And it's like, I wanted to go to Penn, but I didn't get in. So I ended up at Emory, and like, I can't imagine a better fit. Like things happen for a reason. And it's not that common that people are like, oh no, it was a great, perfect fit, or that it was my top choice and it all worked out. So that's awesome. And so you got out here to beautiful Seattle. Was that through Real Networks?
It was through Real Networks. So when I left,
did they recruit you on campus?
They did recruit me. They did not recruit me from campus. So when I left with a plan, so my plan was that I wanted to go and out to the West Coast and go to the mecca of technology. And so most of my interviewing was on the West Coast, and I thought I was going to end up in California.
Yeah, Silicon Valley for sure.
Of course. And I went down to California. At the time, this is 1996, tech in California was not in the city of San Francisco. It was in the suburbs in the valley. And I got there, I'm like, oh, there's strip malls. Man,
Oh, yeah.
people.
I worked in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. It's very strip mall-y.
Yeah, strip malls, Indian people, but some tech companies were there too. I'm like, okay, maybe. And then
in big buildings, big brick buildings, it feels very corporate.
And then Seattle was a city. It was a real city with Elliott Bay right downhill from all the buildings in downtown. And it was vibrant and there were mountains and it was compact. And I was like, this is a really cool environment. And Real Networks was one of the companies that recruited me in Seattle. And they got to know me through my work on various open source projects that I did during my college time. And so not through any campus recruiting, but my first boss at Real Networks knew me from that world and told me to submit a resume, and the rest is history.
So what I'm dying to get your opinion on, I don't remember when it was. It was years ago that I think it was maybe the Journal that did a whole kind of diagram of all of the spin outs that have come out of Real Networks. I'm guessing you were probably in that photo. Like, it's crazy. What was it about Real Networks that made it so special that it was like a breeding ground for training for so many incredible leaders?
Yeah, what you're referring to, I think, is a poster infographic that was done of the ecosystem. And it wasn't necessarily just spin outs. It was people who were at Real Networks and at a number of other companies and then following how many
Real Networks. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
By those people. And I think Real Networks was an incredible entrepreneurial experience, right? Rob Glazer, who's the entrepreneur and CEO, is an incredibly driven guy. He led a high-performing culture and really instilled a hard work ethic in people. And the company was on a mission, and the types of people that were attracted to that environment really went off to be successful, right? I worked with folks like Adam Slipsky, who went on to become the CEO of the AWS business at Amazon and lead. There was at least a dozen people who were on that team who went off and started companies. But just when I say a dozen, I'm saying a dozen out of the 100, 200 people that were there when I was there, not like over the course of that whole company's life.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And so what did you start out as? And then I know that when you left, I think you were chief architect. Is that right?
I don't remember what my exact titles are, but I was there for 4.5 years. And so I started in 1996 as a software engineer in June. And then October of that year, I took over the team that I was on. And from there, it just kept growing in responsibility to the point where I had 2 levels of management, of engineering management under me, and was responsible for all the back-end products like servers and proxies and all the things that streamed media out to the internet.
Yeah. And so while you're there, I know that you started to see that customers were investing a lot in software and that they were also spending money on storage. And so were there storage businesses that you were aware of that were doing it, but not that you felt like you could do it better? And how did you have the confidence to leave a good gig and start all over?
Yeah. So we were selling software to a wide range of companies that stream media on the internet. And so we would stream the media and they would buy storage systems from companies like NetApp and EMC, which were the 2 leaders at the time. And those systems would store the media. And I would constantly observe customers spend $500,000 on software from us and turn around and buy $4 million of storage. And then we'd be debugging all the problems with the storage. And at some point in Real Networks' history, some of those larger storage companies became interested in integrating some of our capabilities into their products. And so we got some of them in our lab, and I got to play with them myself. And I was like, this is what the customer paid $4 million for. Like, this isn't built for media and for unstructured data. The world is changing. And I envisioned that a better way to store media and store these large files was possible. And that was what the spark was that got Isilon, my first company, off the ground. You asked what gave me the confidence. I think that I wouldn't describe it as confidence, as I just put one foot in front of the other and I just closed my eyes and said, let's go do this, because we started that company as the dot-com bubble was collapsing. It pretty much was the worst time to ever choose to leave your steady day job and go and start a company, but we did it anyway.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What month was it?
January of 2001 is our official founding.
Yeah. And then you have 9/11. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. So who was the first person that you called? I'm guessing, were you married at the time?
Nope, I was not married at the time. You're talking about it in terms of when I
Like who, yeah, you have this idea, you're thinking about it, but you don't really like, were you vetting this through and who were you calling to say, I know you have
Yeah.
co-founder.
Yeah. So Paul Mikesell was my co-founder at Isilon.
Yeah.
Paul worked for me at Real Networks, and Paul and I spent quite a bit of time vetting whether this is possible, whether it would be something that customers would choose instead of what they have today, whether it was a reasonable path, the way we were thinking about solving the problem. And so we did a lot of that kind of thinking. It's a funny story. It was one of these days where we had one of these brainstorming types of conversations, and Paul got irritated with me for not quitting my job and going and starting a company. And he picked up some scissors off my desk and said, "These are the scissors of opportunity, and you're just letting them rot and waste on your desk." And he just yelled at me and walked out. And so when I quit, I gave him the scissors and I put them on his desk and I said, "Well, now they're rotting on your desk." And in January, he quit and joined me. And then he handed the scissors to somebody else who will remain nameless, but they are another local Seattle executive. And that person decided not to join. Maybe
Yeah, you're like, whoops, they're probably kicking themselves. So you guys start the company. What does the name Isilon mean?
Isilon means nothing.
It just was like, hey, like what's available?
Yeah, it's the first name of our company was Endurance Systems. Like your storage should be endurant, but we didn't have it. There was trademark issues with it, so we needed a new name. We actually did a pizza naming party, and one of our future customers and another Seattle entrepreneur, Troy Davis, came to the party with like, I don't know, 50 different name ideas. And I go through his list and Isilon is in the middle of it. He pronounced it Isilon. I pronounced it Isilon. I'm like, this sounds great. And then we made up a whole bunch of stories around it. We said, hey, Isilon is the Greek god of storage. And so it's fitting that we've named our company after this.
Yeah, we'll stick with that one. So tell me about the fundraising process. I've heard, I think it sounds fun, although I've heard it's hell. I've never raised funds before, but I'm imagining you'd be really good at it because you're clear and concise and confident and passionate. Like, were you surprised by it? What did you learn?
Well, so the first fundraising process was the one that we did between January of 01 and May of 01. And that was brutal. The dot-com bubble had collapsed, and we decided that as a strategy, we would need to hit a lot of VCs, and you want to hit the wall at once so that the conversations stay on the same pace. So you probably have some competition at the end. So we approached 50 firms, 50, which is very high. We had 40 something first meetings. We spent the next 8 weeks, 3 days down in Silicon Valley, 2 in Seattle, meeting after meeting. The process didn't surprise me much other than the questions just kept getting deeper and deeper. And there was so much uncertainty of that time that promising avenues would just die. Somebody would stop returning calls, or they'd say, well, the partnership just doesn't want to do any deals. And so it was a little bit complicated, but we got it done. I think that the traits you outline are definitely a key part of success in fundraising, but also is, I think, really being able to be quick on your feet and answering questions, to have a real mastery of the entire space around you, and being able to handle objections. Those are good for selling to customers, selling to candidates, selling to VCs, all those types of things. And then we, as a founding group, had a really customer-centric viewpoint, right? We always spoke from the customer's perspective. We spoke about customer interactions and customers asking us to innovate in different areas. And that customer-centric viewpoint was a real key to getting that first round done.
And so who did the first round and how much did you raise?
So we raised 8.4 million in that first round. And so Moderna Venture Group led the round, and then Atlas Venture, which is based largely out of the East Coast, but also had a Silicon Valley and Seattle office, participated in the round, and then the founders kicked in a good chunk of it as well.
And so if there's an entrepreneur listening that's never raised money before and they have lots of opportunities, it's a frothy market, they've got 4 or 5 different firms that have interest. What should they be looking for as far as who to take money from, what value they provide, and even just as it relates to picking board members or being in bed with somebody like long-term versus one night stand?
Yeah. So look, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, you're going to lean on your investors and your board member for a lot of help in a lot of different areas. So first and foremost, you want a personality fit and a connection with that board member. You have to have someone on the board who wants to work, who wants to help, who's seen a lot of companies and a lot of success. VCs, venture capital is about pattern matching and reading people and understanding situations and markets. And so that's job number one. And then their firm and their firm's track record and capabilities, using Madrona as an example, Madrona has resources that are focused on talent recruiting and on executive recruiting. They have resources to help in terms of business development. They've got a wide network in the city of Seattle and all through the country and the world. And so having a firm that has some ability to help you in various ways, I think is really important. And those are the things I think for the first or second time you're going out and raising money. I think at all times you're raising money, when you're inviting someone onto the board, you also need to add to that you want a board member who's going to be engaged and is going to do the work that's necessary to stay up on the company's prospects, what's going on, how it works with the management team. That's super critical, because when board members are called upon to do important things, mergers and acquisitions, approving plans, they have to be super well informed. And the last thing is they have to be a steady hand, right? Board members who represent venture capital firms have conflicting interests. They represent their firm and their investors. And as a board member, they have a fiduciary responsibility only to the company and the shareholders as a whole, not just to themselves. And so you've got to have a board member who's going to keep that straight and make sure that they act rationally when hard decisions are in front of them.
Yeah. And so it sounds like even before you started the company, you had a sense of like what the product market fit would look like. And is there a point when you're like, we got it, as you're iterating and as you're being customer centric? What is that? Is there a methodology there, a process, or is it just you're hearing feedback?
So yes, at Isilon, we had that dialed in pretty well. We knew the type of customer we want to go after. We had some massaging to do in terms of what were the first vertical markets that we go after, because you don't want to try to go after just everything. You want to be pretty focused.
What were they? What did you initially go after?
Initially, our focus was media and entertainment, which is film, broadcast, television, publishing, and internet photos and videos. Those were the two things that we were initially focused on. And in media and entertainment, we became synonymous with like the standard for storage over the course of the next 10 years. So those were the initial focuses for us. So that at Isilon was really dialed in, and the product looked very much like what we envisioned when the company was formed. But I think more broadly, what I would encourage entrepreneurs to think about is product market fit is not just about, oh, this customer said they have a problem, and I can do this thing that's going to fix the problem. Product market fit is much more than that. Product market fit is, what is the problem that I'm solving? I know the customer told me that was a problem, but is that a problem that rises to the level where they're going to change what they're doing now to buy from a new vendor who's really small because they solve a problem? Is that problem big enough? You also have to look at, is the customer going to be able to pay enough to make it worthwhile? Are you going to be able to reach 100 or 1,000 customers like that in a cost-effective way? Are you building enough technology that there's a moat that you can defend when other companies come in and say, oh, I'm going to do that same sort of thing? There's a lot of aspects to product market fit that go into a business plan. And what I find is that often when people say, hey, I'm really customer centric, it's often too myopic. It's like, oh, customer said this is a problem, I'm going to
right. And then they're distracted. They're trying to be all things to all people. Because I've done that with recruiting. I've looked at a lot of different recruiting technologies where people call and just say, as a favor almost, can you look into this? I'm like, God, it'd be really cool if you could do that. And then it's like squirrel, but it's like, I'm a small company in Seattle. Is this going to be applicable across the board? That's interesting. So what was the business model, and did it change over time, or when you went public, was it the same idea, the same business model, or what was different?
Yeah, so the business model there was pretty simple, right? We were selling storage systems. So it's a piece of hardware, and the key IP is all software based. And so customers who buy storage pay a prevailing price. Maybe it's 2x variation from one vendor to the other, but that prevailing price is pretty well understood, and the price declines over time, like just in a steady line over time. And so for us, the job is to go and sell systems into a customer and then monetize repeat buys from that customer as they're growing their system, and then use that first installation to spread into other use cases and other divisions within the company, and then stamp that out company after company. When we talk about company after company, we took a very vertical approach. We would go after everyone in broadcast television, and we'd start with all the major networks and all the cable channels, and we would start in specific use cases and then expand to more and more as our capabilities improved. And we would do that inside that vertical, inside of the internet vertical. After that, we expanded into manufacturing, semiconductor, life sciences, and biomedical research, which became a massive market for us. And then as well taught me enough about biology to be
exactly.
That
That's a whole other world. It's such extreme industries.
So, and so that was what that slow, steady expansion looked like. And when we went public, we continued that expansion. And we were at roughly $100 million revenue quarter right before we sold the business. And from that point, it was getting fairly horizontal. And then the next 2 years, we grew it to $1 billion of top line. And the business got very broad very quickly.
Yeah, it's such an incredible story. So after you were acquired by EMC, obviously you have to stay and the transition, and that's your experience working for a huge company. How would you describe that experience?
It was interesting. I will preface this by saying that I think EMC is a spectacular, they've now merged with Dell, was a spectacularly successful company with really great people, and in general, knew how to run a business and scale a business. So that's the good part. In a 55,000 person company, everything, like from my vantage point as a startup CEO, everything moves like molasses. Every decision's like,
yeah. I would go crazy. And I can tell from your personality, it was probably really painful.
That it was. And it's very political. And it's
of
full of a lot of layers of bureaucracy. And I poked and prodded at a number of ways that I could go and try to affect the organization in a positive way. And my boss was Pat Gelsinger, who's now the CEO of Intel. He's a super supportive guy. But just when you push the boundaries, you say, hey, could I do this? And you get an honest answer out of Pat. It'd be like, no, that's too much for a company like us. We can't go and do something that big. We can't do that much. And so it was constraining and stifling all at the same time. And so it wasn't necessarily for me, but it was an interesting experience.
It's definitely something that, you can check the box. Okay, been there, done that.
Yeah.
I did that thing. And especially for somebody who's so deliberate and thoughtful around culture, that's the biggest thing. Is it's like, sorry guys, like now we're all part of this thing. And it's just inevitable that it's going to be an adjustment. So obviously a big financial gain when your company IPOs and you get acquired. Some people will just be like, I'm going to go golf and chill. And that's not your makeup.
No.
I'm sure your wife is going to listen and be like, yes and yes. What inspired your interest in drug development and diagnostics? I told you a little, we've invested in a biotech company that actually does like gene sequencing, and it's fascinating. But half the time I'm like, I think I know what you're doing, but I'm not quite sure. How did you understand it so well?
So for me, after the last journey, I thought I'd take off 6 months, maybe a year, or figure out what I want to do next and get back to it, because I am not patient. I can only play so much golf, and I need to go and do something. I just want to do something. So I did set for myself some rules and boundaries, right? I wanted to do something very different than what I had done before. I didn't want to be in enterprise software, in storage. I had a million opportunities to go do things there, but I am driven by new challenges. And so I was really only looking at ideas around medical and healthcare innovation, clean energy, and a little bit on the consumer side had a few ideas. And none of the ideas in that space over the course of 4 years really graduated to the point where I was like, okay, that's the one. I'm ready to go and start a company here. But I met this guy, Parag Malik, who's my co-founder here at Nautilus back in 2005. And he was a big customer of my last company, Isilon. got to know him really well. Over the last 12, 13 years, Mira, my wife, and I have been philanthropically supporting his lab at Stanford because we are incredibly impressed with the work he does at the intersection of computing and data science and biochemistry. And he called me up in 2016 and he's like, Sujal, I've got an idea and I'm going to have to put aside Stanford and go tackle this. And I said to myself, whoa, this guy's unbelievably risk adverse. He's going to put aside Stanford to go and start a company. I should learn more. And so I heard the pitch and I paraphrase it as, oh, you're trying to like build the Holy Grail. And if it works, it's going to revolutionize biomedicine. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. I dragged him up to Seattle. We sat at a whiteboard for 12 hours, worked out a plan. And at the end of it, he walked out with a check, a CEO, a co-founder, and we got going and off to the races.
Yeah, so he was initially talking to you as a friend and just like bouncing the idea off you, but also potentially to be an investor. And you're like, it's like a one-stop shop. Here we go. Maybe I'll be your everything person.
Yep.
So he moved up here.
Nope.
To Seattle? Oh,
nope.
He's down there?
We are
still down there.
Company. We're up and down the West Coast. We have offices in Seattle, San Diego, and then the majority of the company, probably about 70% of our headcount is in Silicon Valley.
And first of all, your assistant is amazing, like dealing with her. She was incredible and so on top of it. And I'm guessing that's obviously a necessity when you're split across the country. What kind of systems and like process do you put in place so that there's accountability and movement and vetting of like, are we on the same page when we're not physically using our guts to figure out if we're moving in the right direction? Am I making sense? I don't know if I am.
You are. But first and foremost, the way to solve that problem is that I'm a firm believer that if you're going to do something amazing and innovative and world-changing and hard, you have to be able to be in front of each other a lot. And that means that you've got to be up and down the West Coast at most.
Yeah, I would think so, for sure.
We are a 2-hour flight from Seattle to the Valley. I've been in the Valley pretty much every week since the inception of the company. And we in our offices here go back and forth all the time. My CFO, Anna Mowry, lives up here. She's down in Silicon Valley Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of this week. This is the week I'm skipping. I'm there next week. I'm there the week after. Like you have to be in a regular cadence to be in front of each other. So you can't be very far. The second thing is that digital technology has come a long way. And even before the pandemic, we were on Slack, we were on Zoom, we had all of our cloud collaboration tools. Everything could be done online. And so when the pandemic came, there's no transition. It's like, well, we're already used to all of these tools because we needed them to operate as a company. And I think that this hybrid environment where we have across the offices, I think there's a little bit of loss that you have not having everyone in one place for culture, but it certainly has been very successful. And I think it's a sustainable model today.
Yeah. And so tell me what the company does.
Okay. So
I'm going to listen, tell me you're telling your kids.
I'm going to describe it to you in story form, and I'll build off of what you said about genomic sequencing, right? So in the last few decades, humanity has conquered genomic sequencing. I could take a drop of your blood, I could sequence all the DNA with 99% accuracy in a day for hundreds of dollars. And at the end of that, I will have a blueprint of you. But that blueprint doesn't change from the day you're born to the day you die. And it doesn't tell you anything about the state of what's really going on in your body right now. And to understand that, we have to understand proteins. Proteins are the little machines that make up all your cells, and they do all the work in your body. So as a proof point of that, 95% of our FDA-approved drugs target proteins. Even with this big revolution in genomics, still most of our molecular diagnostics target proteins. And so if we don't understand proteins, we really don't understand what's going on in a human being. And proteins are incredibly complicated and hard to measure. First and foremost, there's a lot of them. An average human like you and I has 37 trillion cells. Every cell has on average 1 million protein molecules in it. It's a massive amount of data that goes into what makes your body tick. And the ability to measure proteins by tools like mass spectrometry, which is the gold standard in today's world, it's very complicated. The best I could do if I took a drop of your blood and I wanted to know all the proteins that were in it, I'd send it through the best workflows available with this mass spectrometer instrument. And at the end of that, I might identify 8%, 10% of what's in there. And we would be looking at the most abundant things, all the rare things that would tell us what's going on in your body. That information is lost. And my co-founder, Parag, has spent his whole career using mass spectrometers to analyze samples, looking at proteins, and he's lived the pain of this world. And what he came up with in 2016 was a brand new method that had never been conceived of to essentially comprehensively profile proteins out of any sample of any organism. And what he envisioned was a instrument that you would buy, which we are building, where you could take any sample of any organism and put it in, and in about a day comes the answer of what all the proteins are, what are the quantities, let you learn about how those proteins are modified. And with that information in the hands of pharma and academic and nonprofit research organizations, you could use that information to build better drugs faster. You could use that information to target drugs more effectively based on what's going on in a person's body. You could build diagnostic tests that find disease much earlier and diagnose disease that may be recurring. It really has a transformative effect across the continuum of healthcare. And we're in that early phase of still about 8 years in now and working hard to get our first product out next year.
And so the thing that you're going to be selling is the product, not the product is the thing.
Yeah, we are going to sell an instrument, a machine, costs roughly $1 million. And we're going to sell it to pharma companies. We're going to sell it to academic and nonprofit research organizations. We're going to sell it to diagnostic companies. They will use that product to develop things that will go into the clinic, drugs, diagnostics, tests, those types of things. And the model for our company is that you buy the instrument, but every time you want to run the instrument, much like a genomic sequencer, you have to buy a consumable kit from us. That consumable kit has different components and a flow cell, a chip, and chemicals and reagents that you use in the system. And the system consumes them. You throw the kit out. You buy another kit for your next analysis.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And so for 8 years, it's been in the development phase, and that's where the perseverance thing comes in.
Oh, yeah. This is a massive challenge. And it's not just a hard problem. It is an incredibly interdisciplinary problem. Inside of my company, I have biologists, I have chemists, I have electrical engineers, I have mechanical engineers, optical engineers, I have single molecule biophysicists, software engineers, data scientists, machine learning specialists, bioinformaticians. I have a million different disciplines that all have to come together. And in many of those disciplines, we need very rare talent, of which there's very few of on the planet. And getting all those people assembled and integrated and functioning as a high-performing team is just an incredible challenge, which, going back to what I told you earlier, is great because it creates this massive moat that I don't see any other companies crossing. I would never wish on my worst enemy going back 8 years and starting from the starting line, because what we are doing is that hard.
It sounds really hard. And I know that I listened to some stuff, I read some stuff in preparation for today, and I know that you've talked about scrappiness. And you're working, your co-founder is an academic, it sounds like, because his training is more in academia, which can be slower and can be just like a different mindset than all these things that you're talking about. And he was drawn to you, obviously, as a friend and as somebody who could help guide him. But what of your skill sets has been the most like, oh, thank God I have this to be able to help push this along? Is it your technical background and understanding how to speak to all these different types of people? Or is it your, like, what aspects are like you tapping into right now the most?
I think so. There's certainly some parts of my technical background that are very applicable to our problem, and I bring them to bear. But I don't think that that's what, between our two, the two of us, our founding pair, I don't think that's what makes it unique. It makes me special in that pair. I think really, like, I pride myself on being a exceptional entrepreneur. And what does that mean? That means being able to recruit the absolute best people and the right people to bring to the task that we have, getting them organized, aligned, pumped up, and passionate about what we do, figuring out what is absolutely necessary, and what you can do without. That is a critical thing, right? If you look at the biomedical research space, companies spend unbelievable amounts of money getting products out the door. We are running this frugally and tightly, and that is going to serve us really well. You also have to go and make sure that you're thinking about that product market fit. How am I going to sell it? How will I position this to a customer? That has been super important to me. And early in our company's life, when it was just Parag and myself and some other scientists, I took on all those roles. I took on the role of product manager, talking to customers, gathering requirements, understanding what they thought about pricing, and doing all that initial research because it's a startup, right? Nobody else is there.
Yeah. And so how are you not like burning out? Meaning, like some people keep their eyes because they're getting constant feedback. Like you need the feedback that's like, oh, you're attaboys. Some people get, eventually I'm going to have this money, but you've got the money. You're not probably getting a ton of attaboys or like validation because it's not out in the world yet.
Yeah.
So how do you persevere
I think
and not burn out?
So I think first and importantly, I will recognize that there are certainly in all journeys, you will feel burnt out and discouraged at various times. And startups are full of really highs and really lows, and you go back and forth between them, right? I think what everyone who wants to be an entrepreneur needs to understand, you need to have perspective, right? And like I wrote a board letter for our last board meeting. It was just, I don't know, maybe a week or 2 weeks ago. And in the letter, it had like a little sketch diagram, and it had you and it had your goal. And it has a nice straight dashed line between them. That's the imaginary line, right? You imagine that you're going from here to your goal in a straight line. And the path actually that you traverse is not wavy. It like goes like this, it twirls around, it comes back out. It is unbelievably circuitous to get to the goal. And there are some points where you're caught in a little spiral. You don't even see the goal in front of you. And the only thing as an entrepreneur that you can rely on is your smart and your drive. Go and put your next foot forward. Take what you have now, figure out how you're going to move it forward. And you can't lose belief in the fact that you're going to get there. You just have to go and keep pushing through. And honestly, that's the phase that we're at in our company now. Like, yes, it's nice on a good day where there's good data and something went move forward, but there's just as many days where things are hard and complicated. You just have to keep moving forward. And like, that's the job of a CEO and founder. And it's a lonely job. There are no attaboys when you're
the loneliness is real. And there's even just like challenges around mental health and feeling of like you're on your heels a lot. And I want to just feel like I'm balancing on my toes and grounded and like I've got it all. There's no such thing as like I'm all caught up. That feeling of like if you have a job, you're like, I finished the project and it's in a perfect little like bow and we're done. It's a constant. And it's incredibly impressive to see your foundation of like where you're coming from as far as recruiting and just understanding what it takes. And you're also doing a lot of investing. I know you've invested in over 85 startups.
Yeah.
Do you believe that your operating experience makes you a better investor?
For sure. And
Right.
I think there are a few things that like just pick a few just random things that I think I've learned that make me a much better investor. When I hire leaders, it's the same vetting process as when you're vetting a founder. And that vetting process gets you to understand whether the person that you're looking at is somebody who is going to be able to make this journey and follow that circuitous path that I described and push through. Do they have the smarts? Are they focused on the entire product market fit? Are they a good read of people? Can they lead? I think that's super, super important. I think evaluating the size of markets, the product market fit, and understanding how will you sell it, what's a profitable model look like, what intuitively, having seen so many companies now, figuring out if I believe them that we're going to be able to get this profitable and that you're going to be able to scale and you will be able to build that next product. Those are all things that I think have been super helpful for me when investing in companies that come straight out of my operating role. And then just like looking at it for companies that invest in that are a little bit later stage, like I'm just gotten very good at looking at balance sheets and P&Ls and figuring out, is this company really on the right track? Are they thinking about that path to profitability and are they going to make it? Do they understand how do they get growth and build new products and stop losing as much money as they're losing today? Like that's been a skill that's been developed just looking at a lot of startups and a lot of public companies, since I do a ton of public investing these days as well.
And if you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking about an idea and you believe that you're onto something and you're looking for a co-founder, here's my question. As an investor, are you thinking, because sometimes I see these things that implode, right? The two co-founders, it implodes because they don't want the same things. They have different ideas of the vision. One's looking for that quick fix. The other's like, no, we're going for the long haul, or even between the venture fund and the entrepreneur. Like, how much are you thinking about when you're starting a company, the conversations that you had with both of your co-founders? Was that part of it? Like, hey, like personality stuff, like how are we going to deal with conflict? What is your idea of working hard? Are we on the same page on that? Because you don't want the person who's like, hey, I'm all about golf all weekend. And you're like, dude, that's not my work ethic, but we forgot to cover that.
Yeah, I think that whenever you're investing early in a startup, you're going to meet all the co-founders or all the key co-founders, and you vet each of them so that they're not going to be disappearing for golf on Friday at 4 p.m., right? That's not what startups are about. I think that it's really important for founders to have really solid personal relationships, and I think that's a key. I think it's always helpful when founders have known each other and worked with each other for a long period of time, both of those things. And if that is not the case, I really want to understand, why are those people different, right? I always get wary when, oh, there's two people and one's a CEO and one's a president, and you're like, what?
The overlapping skill set.
Why are you so close? Like when there's a academic co-founder like Parag and me, who's been CEO roles for a long time, you can see the division of responsibilities, you understand where the space is. Where that gets fuzzy, I get very nervous. And in particular, I have a hard and fast rule that founders cannot be equal. I will not invest in a company with equal ownership. They have to be different. And someone has to be a majority, like, or some set of people, but you cannot have a 50-50 split.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to ask you also about your patents. I cannot believe you have 19.
I can't even keep track of the number.
Well, that's what it says. So okay. You've got patents in the areas of storage, networking, media delivery, 5 patents from innovations related to the development of Nautilus. Why are patents important, and what are you doing with these patents?
Yeah, so it varies between tech, biotech, and other markets, right? In tech, your patent portfolio is largely, at least the businesses I've been associated with, it's largely a defensive portfolio, and you win because of your product strengths and how you bring it to market, your success building a business. But the patents are important because it's defensive, and you've got to have it there to protect the intellectual property you've built. In biotech and pharma and the spaces that I'm in today, IP is much more a very critical part of what you do. And the IP protection and those patents form a critical barrier to entry that is much more significant than tech. And in biotech, any company that's successful uses their assets both offensively and defensively. And there's tons of licensing of assets between different companies. And so it's really important to us where we are today. And when we started in 2016, the space that we're in, no one had conceived of the approach that we're using to identify proteins in samples. And so it was a greenfield to go and start really putting a significant barrier in place for others who would want to use this type of approach. And so it's been really important to us from the beginning.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. Okay, so my final question for you, and I'm guessing, I can't wait to hear this answer because I'm guessing it's all sorts of things, but what fuels you?
What fuels me is that I like building things that make the world better. And at the last place we built storage systems, you might have to think about it for a second, but the things that we did helped companies in media build products more efficiently, get them out to market. In biomedical research, we built storage systems that accelerated research and helped customers put together data in ways that help people's lives. Nautilus is a journey where we're out for more direct impact, right? The innovation that we're building is going to enable better drugs and better therapies to be in the hands of humans, and that enhances the life of millions and millions of people. That's, you asked earlier, like money's not a motivator for me anymore. The attaboys, like that doesn't really motivate me either. Like impact is what motivates me, and what we're doing is really hard, and I don't feel like anyone else is out there that's going to go get done what we're going to get done.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. If you'd like to check out past episodes to hear from more business leaders, go to fueltalent.com/podcast. And if you have a minute, please leave a review and rating on your favorite podcast app, or share this episode with a friend or colleague. Please share any feedback or interview suggestions for other guests by sending a message to podcast@fueltalent.com. I'm Shauna Swerland, and thanks again for listening.